Between 1995 and 2019, 3 young women disappeared from Claremont in Perth's western suburbs. Sarah Spires, Jane Rimmer, and Kira Glennon, taken from a safe, affluent neighbourhood. Spires was never found. The other 2 were found in the bush months later. For 22 years, no one was charged. The case paralysed Perth, changed how women moved through the city, and became the longest-running, most expensive serial killer investigation in Australian history. In 2019, Bradley Robert Edwards was charged, and in 2021 convicted of murdering Jane Rimmer and Kira Glennon. Sarah Spires' murder was never proven, for lack of a body. She has been missing for nearly 30 years. Claremont is the most famous dark chapter in Perth's modern history, but not the only one. Perth is Australia's most isolated capital, separated from the next nearest by 2,700 kilometres of desert, ocean, and outback road, an isolation that has produced a darkness the tourism brochure, the FIFO mining narrative, and the most livable city rankings never adequately capture. This video examines 12 things about Perth nobody talks about, drawn from historical records, criminal case files, environmental reports, and stories Perth's civic identity has chosen not to foreground. Stay with me to the end, because number 1 is not a crime story. It affects everyone who lives in or visits Perth and is documented in scientific literature and government reports, yet never appears in the city's promotional material. Perth sits on the southwestern tip of the continent, on Whadjuk Noongar country, inhabited for at least 45,000 years. The Swan River, Yerrigan, runs through the city's heart, the Indian Ocean borders it west, and the Darling Scarp rises east. It is genuinely beautiful. Extraordinary beaches, world-class wine regions nearby, and summer evenings on the river with a light photographers have tried to capture for 2 centuries. But Perth is also the city of Australia's longest-running serial killer investigation, whose isolation produces social dynamics unlike any other capital, built on Noongar country whose displacement is more complete and less acknowledged than most, and whose relationship to crime, environmental risk, and institutional history its most livable reputation consistently obscures. 12 things. Starting now. Number 12. The Whadjuk Noongar people and the most complete dispossession in any Australian capital city. Perth is built on Whadjuk Noongar country, connected to the land for at least 45,000 years, known, managed, and inhabited when the British colonial expedition arrived in 1829. The dispossession that followed was among the most complete of any Australian colonial city. Frontier violence, colonial land policy, and containment within a narrow coastal corridor left the Noongar people with virtually no formal land rights within Perth for over 150 years. The Noongar dreaming tracks crossing the metropolitan area now pass through shopping centres, under highways, and beneath office buildings, largely inaccessible to the people for whom they are significant. In 2006, the federal court recognised Noongar native title over the entire Perth metropolitan area, later overturned on technical grounds. The Southwest Native Title Settlement, finalised in 2021, is one of the largest in Australian history, but within the fully developed Perth metropolitan area its practical impact is necessarily limited. The deeper question, what it means that Australia's most isolated capital was built on the country of a people whose dispossession was among the most complete in Australia, has not been fully answered. Number 11. The Claremont serial killings and what 22 years of fear did to a city. Between January 1996 and March 1997, 3 young women were abducted from the Claremont entertainment precinct. Sarah Spires, 18, on January 27, 1996, Jane Rimmer, 23, on June 9, 1996, Kira Glennon, 27, on March 14, 1997. Rimmer and Glennon were found in the bush months later. Spires has never been found. The investigation became the longest and most expensive serial killer investigation in Australian history, generating a collective fear that changed how women in the city moved through public spaces for more than 2 decades. The Claremont precinct, a strip of bars and restaurants in a safe, prosperous suburb, lost its casual ease permanently. This was not crime in a marginalised area. These were young women disappearing from a suburb where such things were not supposed to happen, producing a level of fear a less prominent location would not have generated. Bradley Robert Edwards, a Telstra technician, was arrested in 2016, 19 years after the last abduction, and convicted in 2021 of murdering Rimmer and Glennon. His conviction for Spires' murder could not be secured without her body. She remains officially missing. The 22 years to conviction, and the accountability gap around Spires' death, are features of the case Perth has never fully processed. Number 10. The macro murders and the pattern the Claremont case fit within. The Claremont killings did not occur in isolation from Perth's violent crime history. The city had already experienced a significant serial killing case, the Macro investigation, sharing some of Claremont's features. Between 1959 and 1963, murders and disappearances of women in Perth were eventually connected to a single perpetrator, Eric Edgar Cook, investigated separately for years before the pattern was identified. Cook was executed in 1964 for a different murder. Further killings were attributed to him only decades later. This failure to connect the killings reflects the investigative methods of the time, but also Perth's isolation, which produced an insularity that made cross-case pattern recognition slower than elsewhere. Perth's history of violent crime against women, from Cook through Macro to Claremont, is a pattern the city's public identity has never fully integrated. Perth presents itself as safe and livable, the pleasant western capital with the best beaches. Its crime history suggests a darker current beneath that surface. Number 9. The Swan River and the specific darkness beneath its surface. The Swan River, Durbal Yerrigan, is Perth's visual centrepiece, its foreshore walks among the most pleasant in Australia, a recreational amenity and a source of civic pride. It is also one of the most ecologically stressed waterways of any Australian capital. Urban development has altered its depth, extent, and flushing capacity, and nutrient runoff has produced algal blooms that have repeatedly closed sections of the river to recreation over 3 decades. The specific crisis is the decline of the Swan's seagrass meadows, which once provided fish habitat and filtered the water. Nutrient-driven turbidity has destroyed a significant proportion of them, and dependent fish species have declined accordingly. The river has also seen tragedies its recreational reputation does not foreground. Drownings are documented annually, with tidal currents not obvious from the surface contributing to deaths where the water appears calm. The river is beautiful and significantly damaged, both products of the same development that made the Swan catchment one of Australia's wealthiest agricultural regions. Number 8. Perth's isolation and the specific social dynamics it produces. Perth is the most isolated major city on Earth. Adelaide, the nearest comparable city, is 2,700 kilometres east. Sydney is 4,000 kilometres away. Singapore is 4,600 kilometres north. This isolation produces documented social dynamics, a sense of separation, of being simultaneously part of the national story and fundamentally different from it. It has also shaped Perth's relationship to its own dark history. Events here are less likely to reach national media prominence given the distance from the eastern states. The Claremont killings were never a national story the way equivalent events in Sydney or Melbourne would have been. Perth carried the case largely alone. The isolation also produces above-average rates of mental health crisis presentations and substance abuse, attributed partly to the psychological burden of living somewhere genuinely apart, with weaker support networks and family connections a day of travel rather than an hour away. The most isolated city on Earth is not only beautiful, it is specifically demanding of the people who live in it in ways the lifestyle marketing never addresses. Number 7. Northbridge and the specific vulnerability of Perth's entertainment geography. Northbridge, Perth's primary entertainment precinct just north of the CBD, has for decades had the highest concentration of alcohol-related incidents, violent crime, and welfare crises in a metropolitan area. The precinct concentrates the late-night economy, thousands drinking heavily until early morning, with inadequate transport, poor street lighting, and a marginalised homeless population using its infrastructure as their primary urban environment. That mix has produced a pattern of assaults, robberies, and serious violence as people leave venues and navigate toward transport in a district inadequately lit, served, and policed for the intoxicated crowds it regularly contains. Northbridge is not unique. Every Australian capital has an equivalent precinct. But combined with Perth's isolation and above-average mental health and substance abuse rates, it produces an intensity the city's civic narrative consistently underplays. Number 6. Aboriginal deaths in custody in Western Australia and Perth-specific accountability gap. Western Australia has the highest rate of Aboriginal incarceration in Australia, which has the highest rate of any country in the world. Perth, as WA's administrative centre, is where decisions about policing, incarceration, and prison conditions are made. Parliament, Police Headquarters, and the Justice Department are all Perth institutions. The Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, 1987 to 1991, examined 99 deaths and made 339 recommendations. 30 years later, the rate of deaths in custody has increased rather than decreased, and the conditions the Commission identified have persisted. The accountability gap is this: the institutions that could address these conditions are in Perth, while the communities most affected frequently are not, a deficit that has persisted across multiple WA governments and rarely features in Perth's civic narrative. Number 5. The FIFO workforce and the specific social cost of the mining economy. Western Australia's mining economy is one of the most significant in the world. The iron ore, gold, nickel, and lithium deposits of the Pilbara, the goldfields, and the wider interior made the state, and Perth by extension, one of Australia's wealthiest jurisdictions per capita, and the 2000s and 2010s mining boom transformed Perth's skyline, property market, and economic self-understanding. The fly-in fly-out model, housing workers in remote camps on rotation rather than building permanent communities near the mines, has produced social consequences Perth carries disproportionately. Research documents elevated rates of relationship breakdown, mental health crises, substance abuse, and domestic violence, driven by the alternating presence and absence and the difficulty of maintaining normal family relationships within the rotation cycle. Perth has a higher concentration of FIFO-affected families than any other Australian city, and those consequences go unaddressed in its economic success narrative. The mining economy made Perth wealthy. It also made Perth the city carrying the concentrated social costs of the labour model that produced that wealth. Number 4. Kalgoorlie and the gold rush legacy Perth was built on and has never fully processed. The discovery of gold at Kalgoorlie in 1893 transformed Western Australia. The Kalgoorlie Boulder Goldfield, the Golden Mile, became one of the richest gold deposits ever found, and the rush brought tens of thousands of people to a remote location 600 kilometres east of Perth, funding much of the city's early development. The dark legacy is not only historical. In January 2016, after the death of 14-year-old Noongar boy Elijah Dowdy, whose stolen motorcycle had been involved, a riot occurred in Kalgoorlie in which up to 200 people marched on the courthouse and jail and attacked the facilities and staff, reflecting racial tensions built up over years. The riot received international coverage and prompted a brief national reckoning with the racial dynamics of Australia's mining towns before fading from the news cycle. Kalgoorlie's dynamics reflect patterns present in many WA regional towns, but its prominence as the Golden Mile that funded Perth's development makes it a specifically Perth story too. Number 3. The coastal erosion threatening the beaches Perth is famous for. Perth's beaches are among the most celebrated in Australia. Cottesloe, Scarborough, City Beach, Trigg, are central to the city's identity and its self-understanding as a place defined by its relationship with the ocean. Those beaches are eroding. Coastal erosion has been documented by WA government researchers and independent scientists for decades. Sea level rise, changed storm patterns, reduced sand supply, and human interference with sand movement have produced measurable retreat, some sections losing metres of width in recent decades. The groins, sea walls, and beach nourishment programs built to protect beachfront property are costly responses to a process whose underlying causes continue driving it. The Cottesloe foreshore, its tea houses, and car parks, sits measurably closer to the ocean than 50 years ago. Perth's beaches are its most cherished public asset, and the asset most directly threatened by climate-accelerated erosion. The city whose marketing is built on its beaches is watching them shrink, year by year. Number 2. The Fremantle Doctor and the specific atmospheric reality of living in Perth. Perth experiences one of the most distinctive sea breezes of any city in the world. The Fremantle Doctor, the strong southwesterly that develops along the coast on most summer afternoons, is beloved, arriving reliably between noon and 3 p.m, dropping the temperature 5 to 10 degrees. But the Doctor has a darker relative, the easterly, a dry, hot wind from the interior, arriving before the Doctor in the morning carrying out back heat. When the easterly is strong and the Doctor arrives late or not at all, Perth faces fire danger in surrounding bushland and health risks for the elderly and those with respiratory conditions. The Darling Scarp to Perth's east carries bushland directly exposed to the easterly, and when extreme heat, low humidity, strong wind, and dry season fuel load align, Perth faces bushfire risk along its entire eastern suburban interface, from the direction residents and the sea breeze have taught them to regard as safe. The Fremantle Doctor is the city's beloved. The easterly is its danger. The same geography produces both. Number 1. What the dark side of Perth reveals and what Perth does with it. Perth is the most livable city in Australia by multiple rankings, with the best beaches, the best weather for outdoor living, and the highest average incomes of any Australian capital. The lifestyle it offers is genuinely extraordinary. Perth is also the city of Australia's longest-running serial killer investigation, 22 years before a conviction. The city with the highest Aboriginal incarceration rate in a country with the world highest. The city whose beaches are measurably shrinking, whose river is more ecologically stressed than any other capital waterway, whose isolation produces the mental health, substance abuse, and domestic violence crises its marketing never mentions. These are not competing narratives. They are the same city. The extraordinary quality of life and the specific darkness coexist in ways the rankings, tourism boards, and civic identity have never fully integrated. Perth's character as the world's most isolated major city means it carries its darkness more privately than others. What happens in Perth does not easily leave Perth. Claremont was not a national story. The incarceration statistics are not in the promotional material. The coastal erosion is not in the lifestyle marketing. This video does not ask whether Perth is worth visiting or living in. The answer is yes. The beaches, the weather, the river, the wine regions are genuinely extraordinary. It asks what it means for a city to build its identity around those qualities while the darkness beneath continues in documented, ongoing ways. Perth is not the dark side the tourism board wants you to see. It is something more complicated than either the brochure or the nightmare. A real city, with real darkness, carrying it the way the most isolated city on Earth carries everything, largely alone, in the beautiful extreme corner of the continent where everything is farther away than anywhere else. Share this video. Subscribe. And the next time you see a Perth tourism advertisement, remember what it is not showing you. See you in the next one.